On the left is the Samsung QN90F Neo QLED, their 2025 4K mini LED LCD flagship for the year. And on the right is the QD-OLED Samsung flagship for 2025, the S95F. Now price-wise, the QN90F does fall in line closer to the S90F, which is the step-down QD-OLED. The only Samsung LCD that would be more expensive is the 8K models, and they aren't any brighter, so it's not really going to make a difference here. And the brightness level peak in HDR for the Q90 series has remained roughly about 2000 nits for the last 5 or so years, and hasn't really changed. This is one of those examples where it doesn't really matter what a TV measures in window measurements. When it comes to real content, local dimming based LCDs are going to constantly be fighting that brightness to try and keep everything else in check. And that doesn't just apply to Samsung, that's all brands, all LCD models with local dimming, they all are like that. And even with OLEDs, you can't really go off of just the measurements in Windows, as you can have two OLEDs and one measure brighter in Windows, but the other one be brighter in real content. It's just a general kind of guide when you have window measurements, but other than that, window measurements are just one piece of the puzzle that would determine how bright a TV actually is. The QN90F also has a lot of backlight fluctuation, which is contributing to it struggling a lot against the S95F here. The stained glass on the S95F was significantly brighter than the QN90F, even though a window measurement would say otherwise. And you probably should have seen multiple instances now where the backlight on the QN90F has fluctuated, kind of gone up and down in brightness. And that does happen less in real content as the scene changes aren't so frequent. However, something that you could be watching with a lot of like camera cuts may trigger that. Here I'm showing the anti-reflective coating on both of them. While the S95F got a new coating this year, the QN90F has adapted what was on the QN95C and D, and it's a more aggressive and contrast reducing coating than what is on the S95F. The coating on the QN90F also causes a little bit more color issues depending on person to person, because each person is going to kind of see it differently. It's a bit more metameric failure with that coating. Here I'm going to show off angle at a couple different levels compared to straight at the camera. So you can kind of see the fall off, which is really surprising because the 90 series and past models has had much better off-angle viewing. I think the QN90C had some of the best off-angle viewing for an LCD TV. This really falls off quickly if you're off-angle. Now, a lot of people do believe that LCDs are still brighter than OLEDs, and I would say over the last couple of years that has really not so much been the case. There might be a couple edge cases where certain models in certain scenes on LCDs will be brighter, but when it comes to the flagship tier of OLEDs now, they're either about the same brightness or in a lot of cases even brighter. And that's what you're really seeing here is pretty much most of the time the S95F is actually brighter than the QN90F. Even in SDR, which is surprising, the QN90F doesn't really get any brighter. For this video, I did put the SDR to max brightness on both of them, and still calibrated the white point at least, but in HDR is where the OLED is really going to get a lot brighter with specular highlights, because that's what HDR is for, is to make smaller objects stand out and be brighter, and the OLEDs have far greater control of those individual pixels, so very small highlights get significantly brighter. And then even in higher APL now, we're at a point where the OLEDs are bright enough to maintain the APL level and still push these little highlights. And even in the highly graded YouTube demos like this, there's just too much going on in these scenes for the LCD to be able to really push the brightness without graying out and washing out everything around the highlights. Especially when it's very bright colors, that's also where especially QD-OLED is going to really exceed what LCDs can do. Until RGB mini LED later this year, next year, that's where they should be able to do better with color brightness, but they're still going to be going through a LCD panel, so they're still going to have the same kind of issues when it comes to blooming, off-angle viewing, and yes, the blooming is now going to be colored, so it may not be as visible in certain scenes. So don't be fooled by like the demo scenes where it's mostly a black screen and then there's a bright flower or dripping honey or whatever in the scene, because that's a lot easier for a display with local dimming to manage because there's less zones that are active, so the processing has less to do. What's a lot harder for local dimming displays is when the scene is very dark or moderately dark and then has bright objects in it. Something like a scene that takes place in a dimly lit den with a lamp in the corner of the room. So anything around that lamp is going to be having uneven luminance compared to what it should be, and that's what's going to stand out. Or a dark cave with a torch on the wall, something like that. You will see lots of blooming in actual content that way. It doesn't have to be a bright object next to something black. And again, it'll still be the same situation when it comes to really small objects like you're about to see in this next scene, where there's these little blue dots making like a hand shape on the left side, where on the OLED it's able to get those so much brighter than it is on the LCD, with local dimming that is trying to keep everything else where it should be. In order of importance when it comes to image quality, contrast always comes first. And with per pixel control from a self-emissive display, you're going to have better contrast. And it's not just the difference between black and white or in dark scenes. It can be any kind of scene where there's going to be mixed contrast. It's still going to be better on a self-emissive display. Alright, here I have both of them with the brightness at 50 and the peak brightness on high in SDR, show even for sports. The S95F is still brighter and in a bright room has a better coating on it than what the QN90F has. So for a bright room, I would still say get the S95F. In a dark scene like this, which is panning, is going to show any uniformity problems or issues near black. You can see there's really not too much of an issue on QD OLED. QN90F starts showing blooming, and as we move into really high brightness, real movie content, there's either no difference between them in brightness, very little difference, or in a lot of cases the S95F is brighter. And again, coming back to really dark, low luminance scenes, it's just going to be more distracting and more issues on the QN90F. And also you can see when it comes to low luminance stuff that it's raised and it's too bright on the QN90F, so you may think there's more shadow detail and think that it's better, but it's not. The S95F is calibrated with a perfect grayscale and gets very close to reference, so if anything is brighter in a darker scene on the QN90F, it should not be that way. And so while a lot of these clips that I'm showing are very high graded 4000 net metadata movies that are very rare, it will show that even when the content does exceed both displays, the tone mapping on both of them is pretty similar. The difference is going to be, again, in color, where QD OLED is more capable than what the QN90F is. So in this Mad Max scene where the lightning strikes, you see the reflection of the face in the window. In a lot of displays that are near clipping, that face in the window would not be visible. So here you get good detail on both of them. And then even in a scene like this where the QN90F highlights are kind of keeping up with the S95F, the suit darkness is raised, so the lack of contrast is just going to make it perceived to be not as bright either, especially when they are side by side. Now in a large white area like this is where the QN90F is still going to have a little bit of a lead, but that is almost gone, and full white screens in real content is extremely rare. And then in a high contrast scene like this, while the QN90F certainly is not a bad local dimming LCD display, you just see the limitations of the technology compared to an OLED. And then one of my favorite scenes to test is the storm in Mad Max Fury Road, and here you can just see where the QN90F, while getting bright, is losing a lot of the color next to the QD OLED, which is really maintaining the saturation and color difference better. And if you're wondering about the S90F, the step down compared to the QN90F, since they are priced similarly, I do have a comparison with the S95F and the S90F, and it would be a very similar story in most of those scenes, just a little bit less bright on the S90F. Alright, now going into gaming, the first thing I really want to point out is the pixel response time on the QN90F is very slow. It has more ghosting than I have seen on a display that I've tested in quite some time. and it was literally making me feel nauseous playing on it. So if you are sensitive to that smearing look, the QN90F is not going to work for you for gaming. And on top of that, the backlight issues, the backlight pumping and fluctuation issue is far more of an issue in game mode than it was outside of game mode, on top of the local dimming performance in general being reduced in game mode. If you pay attention right now to that quick change in brightness, that pumping back and forth, that's what I'm talking about. That happens consistently in game mode. So this is very surprising because the QN90 series the last few years has been one of the best LCDs for gaming. So it's very surprising that the QN90F has regressed so much when it comes to gaming. Currently you can see them both in Game HDR Basic with static tone mapping, again after calibration, and it's not even really close at all when it comes to gaming that the S95F is a much better gaming display. And the same applies with the S90F, S95D, S90D, and so on. There's really no reason, in my opinion, to be looking at one of the higher tier LCDs anymore. If you're in that budget range, you can get an OLED now, and you can get an OLED that's as bright, near as bright, or brighter, that will have much better contrast, look better overall, be better off angle, and so on. The only real reason to look at LCDs, in my opinion, is if your budget is like $600-700 or lower, or if you're looking at 98 inches and above. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and call it here. The video will continue for another minute or so. If you made it to the end, let me know in the comments below if you liked the video, if it helps you out at all, and I will catch you all in the next one. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.